On this episode of Why Should I Care, we examine the rising tide of anti-police bias and what it's causing in our society. Coming up right now.
Why should I care?
Why should I care?
Why should I care?
Why should I care?
I'm not sure why I should care.
I don't know why I should care.
And welcome back to Why Should I Care? This is your host, Pastor Adam, and this is the daily podcast where I give you one thing you shouldn't care about and another thing you really need to care about. These daily topics intend to keep you thinking from a conservative biblical worldview. And as we continue to grow this podcast audience, we want to just say thank you for all of you who are subscribed, who have shared a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and on Podchasers. If you haven't done so already, we please would encourage you to do that. It helps our audience to grow. And the more that we grow, the more people can hear these important messages that are so needed in this desperate generation. Please follow us on all of our social platforms, including Parler, Twitter, Facebook, Medium, Rumble, YouTube, and Instagram. You can sign up for email updates at our website, whycarepodcast.com. You can also get text alerts straight to your phone. You text the keyword WhyCare to 844-990-3380. Leave us a voicemail. There's a link in the show notes to leave us a voicemail. If you want your comments to be heard on future shows, we encourage you to use that link. You can also send me an email with thoughts, comments, questions, reviews. My email is adam@whycarepodcast.com. And again, please, I need your feedback on what you prefer with this podcast. I have tried scripting these out word for word. I've also tried talking off the cuff. I just would love to know what feedback you might have regarding which of those formats you prefer. And now jumping into our topic of the day on this terrific Tuesday. Begin with a question. Why would anyone want to be a cop today? I'd like to begin with the story of Rick Woolard, who is a retired Navy SEAL, happens to live here in the same city that I do, Virginia Beach, and he served in Vietnam as a Navy SEAL. This article from the Virginia Pilot described his service. Going to Vietnam was a given. It was his job. He had taken an oath, and he was satisfied that his country's leaders were trying to do what they thought was right: stop the spread of communism, save the South Vietnamese. On the ground, no one had time to ponder such things. The daily goal was simple: kill the enemy, and don't get killed yourself. Woolard said, "You're not looking up very high. Your loyalty and concern is to the guy on your left, your right, in front, and behind, and you'll do anything not to let them down." There wasn't much of a playbook back then. The fledgling SEALs were figuring things out as they went. Woolard worked in a marshy area outside Saigon known as the Forest of Assassins. By day, he'd go up in a helicopter, scouting the lay of the land. By night, he and his men prowled the darkness, hiding, listening, ambushing, being ambushed. Everyone in his platoon survived that tour, but several were wounded, including Woolard. In October 1968, he was shot in the arm and in the leg. 10 days later, shrapnel sliced open a shoulder. He healed and went back to work, staying in Vietnam for 3 more months. He describes the first words he heard when he returned back home: "Welcome home, baby killer." At that time, the anti-war protests had grown to a crescendo, and all of the vitriol was being emptied out onto our military coming home from war. I think we can all agree that was despicable. But maybe what we can't agree on is that now that vitriol is being directed not at the military, not at soldiers coming home from war, but at the police who are patrolling our streets. The things that are being said about them in our current situation are just as heinous and just as unhelpful. So let's take a look at where we are right now. We are in the midst of seeing skyrocketing crime rates in U.S. cities. Let me give you some examples. In Los Angeles, Murders are up more than 25% compared to last year. Shootings are up nearly 80%. In Atlanta, murders are up 59% year over year. In Pittsburgh, 80% to 90% spike in shootings this year compared to last. They reported 20 homicides and 50 non-fatal shootings in 2021 alone. New York City has seen 50 people shot just in the last week. This figure represents a 257% increase from the same period last year at the height of lockdown. So far this year, 416 people have been shot citywide. That is a 72% increase on 2020. So what's going on? Why are we seeing a spike in shootings, in murders? Well, I think it makes perfect sense. It is in those same places where police are the object of scorn by their own communities, by their own city councils, by the politicians who are supposed to be funding them. And so the police are retiring, resigning, and leaving these cities in alarming numbers. But not everywhere. There are some cops who are staying. Police departments in conservative areas seem to be doing just fine. It's only somehow in Democratic-run or liberal left-leaning cities. Think of this. The top 10 U.S. cities for violent crime per capita, according to FBI statistics, are St. Louis, Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, Kansas City, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Stockton, California, Albuquerque, and Indianapolis. What do all of those 10 cities have in common? Overwhelmingly run by Democrats and left-leaning politicians. See, these crime spikes only happen where cops are leaving. Cops are leaving these areas because they are hated there. And so all the good officers are leaving those areas where they are most needed. They are leaving the residents to suffer. This from an article in the New York Post. At least 8,600 black lives were lost to homicide in 2020, an increase of more than 1,000 compared to 2019. Violent crime is concentrated in primarily low-income, marginalized black communities where the police are under-resourced and Democratic leadership has abysmally failed. In Chicago, 80% of gun violence victims in 2020 were black. According to the latest data in New York City, 71% of shooting victims are black, even though black people are only 26% of the city's population. So this tragic reality is that one black life was killed just less than every hour in America last year. So let me ask you, did those black lives matter? While the media loves to run with the headlines of anti-police and systematic racism, we focus in on the very rare cases when black suspects are killed by police officers. But do you know how often that actually happens in America? In 2020, there were only 19 police shootings of unarmed black men. 19 times. Those are the ones that got all the attention, but what about the 8,600 black lives that were lost to homicide because of bad police policies? Because of pressure being placed on the local beat cop on the street, that when he gets the call that there is a shooting, that there are guns popping off, that he is within the distance, that he could respond right away, or he doesn't have to. He could sit in his patrol car for 2 or 3 more minutes until the shooting is over. And that's exactly what's happening in these Democrat-led cities across our country. If we punish the police, we punish ourselves. We punish the very neighborhoods that need the police more than the rest. So, what don't we care about today? We don't care about reforming the police. Now, I understand there's no such thing as a perfect police officer. I understand that, yes, where improvements can be made, they should be made. I think the vast problem here is not in the police departments. Yes, there are probably some jerks out there. There are probably some racist police officers, too. There's no perfect police officer. But you know what? There's also no perfect teachers. Should we force teachers out of classrooms for the same reason? Because there's a few teachers that are doing evil things? What about doctors? There are plenty of doctors, we could find cases of doctors doing horrible and evil things. Does that mean that we should persecute and come against them? Every doctor across the land? I believe that the vast majority of cops are the good guys. Let me give you a couple of stories. When no one showed up to the autistic boy's birthday party, strangers saved the day. The police in Ocala County, Florida, saved the day for 6-year-old Glenn Barati when no one came to his birthday party. The sheriff's office learned of the situation via Facebook, and they made sure Glenn's birthday party was a celebration he would never forget. In London, Kentucky, Officer Justin Roby took action when he learned that a would-be shoplifter was a single father who had fallen on hard times and was stealing formula for his 6-month-old baby. Instead of issuing a citation, Roby purchased the baby formula himself and gave it to the man. In Wayne County, Michigan, Sheriff's Deputy Mark Bennett swept a Detroit woman off her feet as she stood contemplating her options to get down a long flight of stairs. The woman was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the year 2000 and asked for Bennett's help descending the staircase, so he picked her up and delivered into a waiting car downstairs. From San Diego, California, police officer Jeremy Henwood bought lunch for a boy that he didn't know. Just minutes later, the officer was killed in an unprovoked shooting rampage 6 blocks from the McDonald's. In Odessa, Texas, police officer Jeremy Walsh gave a homeless man a pair of boots and a bottle of water after noticing the soles of the man's shoes were completely worn through. Walsh said he sees the man frequently during his patrols and thought he could use the boots more than himself. We can find stories like this over and over and over again. Good cops doing good things in their communities, the same communities that they live in. Meanwhile, we have the story of Patrisse Cullors, the leader of Black Lives Matter and self-described Marxist, who recently purchased a $1.4 million home in an exclusive Los Angeles neighborhood where a vast majority of residents are white. The home, which features 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, is nestled in Topanga Canyon and has a separate guest house on the property. It's a 15-minute drive from Malibu beaches, featuring bamboo floors and vaulted ceilings, according to the listing. So here's the person in charge, the founder of Black Lives Matter, living large in Topanga Canyon among 95% white community. Compare that to the stories of these police officers that are getting down into the business of their community and doing some actual good. Who's the real hero and who's the real villain? And so what do we need to care about today? We need to care about these politicians and activists that are stirring up the rage machine against police in order to enrich and empower themselves. The biblical principle that the devil employs against God's people is divide and conquer. A house divided cannot stand. That's why we need a strong police force. When the police are doing what they're supposed to be doing, they are providing justice. They are providing civilization instead of chaos. The thin blue line as it stands is the line between barbarism and civilization. And there are very few public servants that are able to do what your local police and sheriff can do. We believe that God is a God of justice, Deuteronomy chapter 32. He demands justice of his people in Deuteronomy 16. Follow justice and justice alone. Psalm 82 says it like this: defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. I ask you, if the police are not doing those things, then who is? When you call 911, who is going to help you? If we belittle and berate our local police departments, we are only hurting ourselves. Most police are motivated by the righteous cause of upholding justice and peace in the same communities that they live in. And I pray God's blessing and protection over them for what they do. And I hope that you will also. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Please leave them for me, adam@whycarepodcast.com. That's going to do it for this edition of the Why Should I Care podcast. Hope to see you again soon.